accelerated heart rate, shaking knees, and sweaty hands as nervousness, which is attached with fear. And so that fear just grew until I was 35 years old and decided I cannot leave this planet without having overcome this ridiculous fear that doesn't seem to be sourced from anywhere. But now, 20 years later, I can happily say that I no longer get stage fright or performance anxiety. I haven't experienced it in any situation for a long time. And so that empowerment of my voice, that ability to get my message out there in singing and in speech, that's what I hope to share with other people who are being held back by their voices.
Hey friends, it's Mary, and this is the Mary Guirovich Show, a podcast that champions today's working women to gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to uplevel your career while strengthening your faith and living your dream life, all in record time. We'll cover topics like career advancement, leadership, personal development, faith, and health and wellness, so you can intentionally create a career and life full of more abundance, joy, and love. Let's get started.
Hey friends, I am so excited that you are joining us for today's episode. I hope that your holiday season is going terrific. I know it has been so much joy and so much fun planning events for the kids and for the family, and really just spending some extra time with God as well. But today I brought in a really special guest for you. I've known this woman for nearly a year now, and each time I see her, well, she just has this beautiful spirit for one. But secondly, she is a powerhouse. And I recently was watching her TedX talk, and I knew in an instant that I wanted to have her on the show. Nancy Boss is a keynote speaker, a vocalist, and has published several best-selling books in the field of voice. Her purpose is to help business people and entrepreneurs step into the power of their voice, the power that has been theirs all along. One of the key elements to empower people to speak up and speak out is looking at the personal stories that hold us back and shifting those, reframing into stories that propel us forward. Nancy, I am so excited that you're here today. Welcome on in.
Hi, Mary. It is such an honor to be on your podcast. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm super excited that I can be part of it today.
Absolutely. Well, we are just so honored, like I said before, to have you on the podcast today. You just have such a powerful message for women, and just having the opportunity to get to learn from you, I knew that I wanted to bring you in so that the women listeners that we have will have the opportunity to learn these wonderful insights too, and you're going to be the one to tell us all about it, but our voice and what we have inside of us is so powerful and so important. So we know you've done all the things. You've been on TEDx, you have courses, you've trained, you're a speaker, you've done all of the things. So Nancy, has it always been like this for you? Have you always been comfortable speaking?
No, aren't most of us motivated to solve problems for ourselves while solving the same problem for other people? Absolutely. So I suffered from serious stage fright, performance anxiety, shaking knees. I was a singer. I was the kid in my church who I got the solos in my high school. I was raised in the Midwest in a Lutheran congregation where I was encouraged to sing. I always felt like my singing was being judged, and oftentimes it was. But when someone would come up to me after a singing contest and tell me you did a great job, well, that's a judgment. Or if somebody came up to me in church after I'd sung a solo and said, you did a great job, part of my mind was thinking, well, that wasn't the point, me doing a great job. The point was channeling the spirit through me so that you could be moved by the message of the music. And so that little aspect of judgment that was in my singing all along, and also in my piano playing, my piano competitions. I remember when I was in a piano competition once when I was in middle school, and I was standing in the hallway outside of the piano competition at Augustana College in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and my hands were sweaty. And I noticed they were sweaty, and I rubbed them together, and the hall monitor, with all great intentions, smiles at me and goes, oh, you must be nervous, you poor dear. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is nervous. Sweaty hands are nervous. And from that moment on, I defined accelerated heart rate, shaking knees, and sweaty hands as nervousness, which is attached with fear. And so that fear just grew until I was 35 years old and decided I cannot leave this planet without having overcome this ridiculous fear that doesn't seem to be sourced from anywhere. But now, 20 years later, I can happily say that I no longer get stage fright or performance anxiety. I haven't experienced it in any situation for a long time. And so that empowerment of my voice, that ability to get my message out there in singing and in speech, that's what I hope to share with other people who are being held back by their voices.
Yeah, wow. What an incredible story and journey. And I love how you shared that because it was like that cue of our hands being sweaty led you to believe and someone saying, "Oh, you must be nervous." And right, we think that. But it can mean so many more things. But Nancy, tell me, where does stage fright come from?
Oh, that's a great question. If you find that your voice is shaky or you're just don't feel ready or you're just hiding because you're afraid, that fear is coming from someplace earthly, right? That fear is not coming from the spirit moving through us. There is something from our past or in our surroundings. Like I mentioned about in church that I felt judged, that fear of judgment was part of the cause of my stage fright. Sometimes it's in the case of stage fright, it might be a shock. Like I am now, my dad, he used to, when I was practicing piano, his office was right below my piano. And if he had to make a phone call, he would pound on the ceiling with a broom handle. So I'm playing along, something beautiful, of course, because all I played was beautiful stuff. And bam, 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 and ah. So, so that was also part of the start of my stage fright was that shock that I never knew when it was going to happen. Random shock when I was playing piano. So it's those stories from our past that build on top of each other and can spiral into quite a bit of anxiety about using our voices and standing up in front of other people. I don't think that stage fright or performance anxiety are a given. I don't think that they're necessarily a natural part of being a human. I think they're actually trained into us by the stories that we hear from ourselves, our communities, the people around us, or traditions that tell us you don't belong here. I think those stories really are the root of stage fright.
Wow, that is so impactful because we've all heard, stage fright, it's like one of the number one fears of people. People are more afraid to speak in front of others, especially public speaking, than, even dying, which is crazy. But
Yes.
what I hear you saying is we don't actually have a fear of speaking, it's the fear of judgment and the other things that may have occurred along the way. Would be safe to say probably then that it's different for different people. So what are some other things that maybe people have experienced that could be causing them to feel this sense of stage fright? Because I know, with careers, and since our listeners are driving towards careers, they want to advance in their career, there's huge fears around talking to our boss about what we
Yes.
actually want in
Yes.
our careers and advocating
Yeah.
for ourselves, even though we can advocate for others all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. One example that I'd like to give you is a woman who's worked with me in the past, and she really wants to lead a retreat center. She wants to be the person who, determines the future of this retreat center. But what she's found is that she is stuck in servant positions rather than leadership positions. And the reason why she's stuck, she believes, after exploring this for a few months under my guidance, is that she believes that she's stuck because she doesn't know how to say no to authority figures. Inside of her, she was trained as a child that when it comes to authority figures, yes is always the answer. She will always say yes. So, pretend her name's Jane. Jane, will you please sort these papers? Will you please clean this filing cabinet? Will you please call that business and change that contract? Yeah, she'll do all those servant roles. So that asking up to leadership for what she wants comes from childhood conditioning. So once she realized that it was the little girl in her that was saying yes to all of those things, but that is not the message that her spirit was telling her was her real purpose on this planet, then she started to reframe that story. And this is what I was as a little girl, but this is no longer who I am. And I am now the leader who can take charge of my own career.
Wow. I love that story too, because you shared that story and then you shared your story where your dad was kind of just poking on the ceiling. And I think sometimes we have this tendency to think that if we have this fear, or, like some of us didn't have a bad childhood, or even if there were things were unfavorable, like we didn't have a lot of money growing up,
Mhm.
but I had loving parents. They did the best they could. I think as parents, and being a parent now, we all know we can do what we know with what we know, right? You can't do better until you know better. And but when you're sharing these stories, here it was, your dad's just like, he probably thought this was a genius idea. It saved him going up the
Yes.
stairs, and you knew exactly what to do. And it's not like he was yelling at you. It's not like you were doing something wrong, but it still had that trigger for you. The same way us being told to listen to authority figures, which I'm hearing this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I tell my kids, right? I want them to listen. I want them to be respectful. And so these are good things. But when we carry them to other areas of our lives and we don't learn how to set these boundaries or use our own voice because we're respecting authority, it doesn't help us to get what we actually want and hinders us. So that is just two really impactful stories that you just shared there. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It isn't the authority. The authority isn't always our parents or our family members or the people that are immediately close to us. Sometimes the authorities are the institutions that we go to. For instance, historically, I'm talking about in the 1950s and earlier, in college, if women got to go to college, they had to wear skirts. They couldn't play sports. Basketball was half court. All of these little messages from that institution that told them that, you know what, you are not equal, you're not the same, and you need to be limited in these ways. That would leak into their rest of their lives, this lack of empowerment from the institution. And then the similar things can happen for any community or organization that we belong to, whether that's churches or religious parties or simply social institutions that we belong to at home.
Yeah, and it sounds like the takeaway from this is just to distinguish. Like, it's okay if a church, I mean, I go to a large church, they have to have a standard set of rules. Like, I'm part of the prayer team, and there are certain things we're allowed to do, there are certain things we're not allowed to do, and they have to have these certain set of rules. But taking those roles, and I think whenever we're children, we don't realize it because it's what we're taught. And so we take it across all areas of our life. And if something didn't work in one way, or we were told to do something one way, we just take it to the next area and say, okay, we must do this here too. And it's our way of processing and really making our lives easier. But what I'm hearing from you is, and we could even have a tendency to do this as adults, is that yes, there will be these structures, there will be these rules, but we need to understand that we don't need to take them with us. So if at church we shouldn't be doing something, it doesn't mean in the workplace that this is not appropriate, or that we shouldn't be doing that as well, because in that place it may be fully appropriate. It may be the thing that we actually need to do.
Our relationship with our husband, our relationship with our fathers and mothers is different than our relationship with our boss or our coworkers or anyone else in the business world. And we need to not get those confused. So in order to get those stories straight in our head, we have to realize that those stories are what's holding us back, just like we're doing right now. I'm sure there's light bulbs going off in your audience all over the place that, oh, I didn't realize that this was what I was doing. And then as soon as you realize that you're carrying over a message from one story to another that doesn't belong and doesn't fit, then you can start to reframe that and make those stories or personal narratives work for you instead of against you. You can make those beautiful messages that you're receiving one place and that loving support. You can transfer that information by making it work for you and bring you into light instead of holding you into darkness.
Yeah. And do you have any tips that people can use to identify these areas?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that you might need to do, it's not going to be comfortable. It's hard work. And I do think that the work should be done in a safe place, away from things that trigger you. So the work will be challenging. So you want to find a safe place to do the work, away from things that might trigger you, because what I want you to do is lean into your fears. When you feel a fear, I don't want you to shut down and be like, oh, afraid, backing up now, beep, beep, beep. Instead, what I want you to do is see that fear and go, okay, where's that coming from? What is the source of that fear? What's the kernel that's in there? And you might be surprised that it is something that really isn't related to the experience that you're having right now. A lot of times these fears, especially if they're seated in our childhood or seated, I'm not sure which one it is, then if they're planted in our childhood, they get applied all over the place. And we don't realize that this story from our background that we were told by other people or that we experienced, or heaven forbid, if you had a childhood trauma, no matter how small, like frankly, that broom being pounded below my piano was a small t trauma when I was practicing, but there's also huge traumas that can happen completely unrelated to our voice and our fear and our anxiety, that those are the cause of it. So going back to saying, be in a safe place. I recommend that you use a coach or a therapist who is not inside of the stories that you are trying to examine. In other words, if you're in an institution that you're feeling fear in that institution, don't use a coach or a therapist who's also in that institution. Use somebody who's neutral from the outside who can help you dig deep on these stories, because you might find some uncomfortable things that you need to deal with and reframe and make those things work for you instead of against you. And then I'd say the last thing, I think this is really going to resonate with your audience, Mary, and that is listen to the stories from your heart, from the spirit, because those stories might very well be the reason that you were put in this life on this planet at this time. And honoring those stories and honoring the spirit's message through you is your number one responsibility, in my opinion.
You gave me chills when you said that. It was just like so beautiful. And it's so true because, yes, God is giving us this mission. He's given us a purpose and a plan. And I love how you said lean into that fear, because just because we have that fear doesn't mean that it's wrong. And I think so often society has told us to, you know, do what feels good, do what feels right. But that's not what God's word says. That's not, there are many times, right? And God tells us he knows we're going to experience fear. It says it 365 times in the Bible, one time for every day. Do not be afraid. And so he knows that we're going to have fear. He's already there to comfort us. And I love how you said, just try to figure out where that root is coming from to see if it's associated. But the other thing I just want to point out that you said that I feel like is really impactful is to not always use somebody that's within the organization. I think that's where we sometimes get it wrong. And whether it's a mentor or sponsor or somebody where we're trying to get our career advice from somebody else in the organization, it's not always the best advice, because who knows what information they've been given or how much do they really know. Where it's helpful to have a mentor or a sponsor, it's not always the most helpful. Sometimes they have bad information too, and they are using their childhood experiences, their own fears, they're using their own experience, and they are directly applying that to you in your situation. And that's not always, it's just not always helpful, because you're not always experiencing the same exact thing as them.
That's absolutely right, 100%. If every single person, all of us, our entire experience as a human is written by the stories that we have heard and believe about ourselves, from our families, from our community, from tradition, and from ourselves. Those stories are what make us who we are. Every person has them. And so when you're looking for a coach or a mentor, you want to find somebody whose stories might be a little different than yours, so that you can listen with fresh ears from their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Nancy, how did you ever even get interested in this whole field of voice and stage fright? What got you into this?
I am so glad you asked that. The field of voice just was because I was the best singer in my little town growing up. And so, of course, I went off and majored in music in college, not having a clue what that meant. And as my performance anxiety, my stage fright grew and grew, I actually changed my major to business administration with a music minor, because I was not going to do a senior recital. That just wasn't going to happen. And then I went into business for several years, worked in corporate America, and then, moved on to nonprofits, have worked for nonprofits for many years and tackled the performance anxiety. But one hobby career that I had that turned into a full-fledged career was being a voice teacher, a singing coach. And I did become a professional performer. But I realized all the time through teaching singers that I could give them all the tools in the toolbox that they needed. Same with speakers. When I coach speakers, I could give them everything they needed to be awesome on stage. But as soon as they hit the stage, all bets were off based on the stories that they believed and were telling themselves in that moment. The most amazing singer in the room could crash and burn if they didn't believe in themselves. And then I had this amazing experience of writing a book with two other women called Singing Through Change, Women's Voices in Midlife, Menopause, and Beyond. And Singing Through Change was a book that we wrote about how the voice changes because of our hormone changes and aging through our 40s and 50s and beyond. In that book, we had to do our own research and we interviewed 56 different women. And one of the most amazing things I learned from those interviews was that the stories that the women told themselves impacted their postmenopausal lives so much. If the stories that they told themselves were that menopause is awful, I am just barely going to survive this, and on the other side, I'm going to be a husk of a woman I used to be, which kind of sounds ridiculous, but honestly, that is the story that many women are telling themselves. Then invariably, they would gain weight, they would have health problems, they'd be grumpy about it, depressed, it would damage their relationships, and on the other side, they would have to deal with all that damage. The opposite was true for women who were excited that this is my opportunity to change and flower and grow into what I am to become. And those women would embrace, they'd be exciting and encouraged, their relationships would grow and their health would grow. So the stories that those women were telling themselves was impacting their lives so much. And that's when I realized, putting those two together, that the stories about our voice, they make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and so can you kind of dive into that deeper? How does that work?
How does what work?
How does telling ourselves stories? So if I tell myself this story, because right, we have these stories around our careers as well. So maybe I'm telling myself this story because most women would rather
Yeah.
leave their jobs and go in and ask their boss for an advancement, and that's something I'm trying to change because there's so much stress whenever we have to switch careers. But we switch because we're stressed, thinking that the grass is going to be greener on
Yes.
the other side, but it's not. And I feel like that's a story we're telling ourselves, or maybe because we haven't been selected for advancement and we're wanting to be selected because maybe when we were in childhood, we were kind of conditioned or taught to, wait and let others kind of acknowledge us. That's what we do in relationships. We wait for the boy to ask
Yep.
us out. We wait for the boy to ask for our hand in marriage, and we're kind of to ask us to prom or all of the other things. And when that doesn't happen, we can be kind of left deflated. So how do those stories kind of impact our decision making?
Well, we can look at it in micro or macro. And so let's look at the micro first. And the micro is if you've got what you perceive of as fear or anxiety, self-doubt, you feel maybe selfish. I think you've used the words greedy in past podcasts. If you feel confused or you're lacking confidence when you go in to have those actual conversations, you know what? That's going to show up in your voice and it's going to show up in your body language. Now, your body language, perhaps you can make your Wonder Woman superhuman pose and you're like, okay, I got the body language. But the voice is, you know this about the human voice, that if you hear somebody that you love on the phone, all they have to do is say hello and you know how they're feeling because the voice is that much of an indicator about our emotional state. So if your voice shows up with selfish, greedy, confused, lacking confidence in your mind, then that's the message. That's the subconscious message that the recipient's going to receive. So it's really important in the micro to believe in yourself. I'm here at the right place, at the right time, doing the right thing, and that will come through in your voice. In the macro, that little piece, those little moments just build and build on each other. And so each time that you do this with confidence and knowledge that you're moving forward in the way that you were intended to move forward, that the Spirit is talking through you, putting you on the path that you're supposed to be on, as soon as you reframe it like that, time after time after time, that becomes who you are. You start to be able to push the negative voices away, and the positive voices are stronger. They are the ones that you feed, and those are the ones that give you the courage and strength to move forward with what you know is right.
That's so cool to just understand that because, and I think what you're not saying, but we should also just touch on here a little bit because what you're saying is so powerful, right? The story that we tell ourselves that changes our voice, it changes how we sound. And yes, we want to sound confident. We want to kind of remove some of that stage fright and that fear so we can have the courage to do the thing. But on the other end of it, somebody is receiving that communication. So how does our personal story or narrative, how does that actually affect the person on the other side hearing the communication?
Wow, that is a super awesome question. How does our story that is coming through our message and our voice and our body, how does that impact the person who's hearing it? Well, they've got pattern recognition expectations as well. And the minute that you start speaking, or the minute they make their first impression or their most recent impression of you, they're comparing you to people in their past, right? They've got these narratives from their own childhoods, from their own adult experiences, and from the community around them that says, oh, for instance, if you come into a room and you start speaking with what's called uptalk. I recently watched a video of Connie Chung in 1994 complaining about uptalk. So uptalk is when we end our phrases by turning them up, and that's really an unempowered way to speak. You hear how each sentence is going up, even if it's not a sentence that is a question, it's going up to many, many ears. That is a giving away of power. That is the person speaking saying, I don't actually deserve to say this, or I'm not sure it's the right message. That's what they're hearing subconsciously. Instead, the person who says, I'm here because I am going to say what needs to be said, and this is the right message, and every one of my sentences turns down at the end. That's also a message to the listener that this person is serious and they know what they're talking about. It's confidence in the voice. Now, I will say there are some people in our culture who do not expect to hear confidence from women. And so they will immediately jump to an assumption that this woman is pushy or bossy or a know-it-all. Oh, know your audience, I guess is the message there. Hopefully you know who you're talking to. If you're talking to a group and you really don't know your audience, it could be anybody, be true to yourself. Give the message with confidence and grace and courage that this is my message and this is how I need to deliver it. But if you do know your audience and you know what might trigger them, think about that ahead of time with your voice.
Yeah, that's so powerful because we make that impression, and it's funny you talked about the uptalk because once I learned about uptalk, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I did when I went in to ask my boss for the open position. And not only did I go in and say, I want the open position, but even when I would share the story years after, I was sharing it with the uptalk. And
Oh,
it never even occurred to me that that's how I was actually asking it. And so I was asking it as a question instead of as a statement. And that's one reason why I teach the promotion planning. And that's not why I teach it, but that's why I believe that it's so powerful when we actually diversify our communication, because most career decisions, whether it's hiring or whether it's promotion or even a raise, it's basically done on a verbal conversation. And we
right.
think that it actually is about our resume. We think that it's actually about the work that we did previously within the organization. But most of those things can't be remembered or weren't detailed and studied. And most often, it's just about how we communicate and convey with confidence our strategy and our confidence that we are the right person. And it's that
Yeah.
communication that gets us there. So when we have to rely on that alone, and I'd love for you to kind of speak into this as well, because what I understand with confidence is that a lot of times it's built through preparation and repetition. But when it comes to interviewing or it comes to going in and asking your boss for a promotion or a raise, we're not doing that very often. So how could we possibly get
Right.
confidence through repetition of actually experiencing it? I teach some other skills and
Mhm.
ways, but that's why I just really feel like we have to diversify the way that we ask, especially as women, because what you just pointed out is some people are already going to have this preconceived, well, you're sounding bossy type of an attitude. No, that's not everybody. But so when we can diversify and not just depend on our voice, then we can actually amplify our results. So could you just speak a little bit
Absolutely.
into, how can we build confidence in our speaking?
You're right. In my world, we call it exposure therapy, where try something over and over again, and it gets easier and easier. How I overcame my performance anxiety, my stage fright, was the psychological tool of hypnotherapy and exposure therapy, and having a mentor who had extreme confidence in me and was very, very worthy of me believing in him. So he was a world-class singer and voice teacher himself, and he said I was good enough. And so that little extra piece really mattered. What I do think, though, is that, well, let me tell you a story. There was a woman who came to me for voice lessons, speaking voice lessons. She is a forensic accountant, which means she's an accountant with a team of other accountants who looks at the books after something has happened, that something's gone wrong. They look at the books and try to figure out what went wrong with this accounting. Well, she was the only woman in a room of 8 people in forensic accounting, all men, and they couldn't hear her. She would try to say something and they would talk over her or just not hear her or repeat what she said and make it their own idea. So she came to voice lessons specifically with the goal of lowering her voice. Now, I'm just going to give away the answer right now. That is not the correct way to be heard, is by trying to talk like a man. That won't do it. Now there is something about how women tend to run our vowels together. We talk in a more slurred phrase, a more flowing type of pattern. Men tend to talk with more choppy words that are separated. And so if, as a woman, we want to make a real point, we can use our normal, natural woman range, female voice, whether that's high or low. There's women I know who this is their natural range. But if they speak in that slightly choppier way, the pattern that men are used to hearing, and turning each phrase down, that type of thing actually makes them more hearable by the men. Now, it's also worth noting that the women's voice range, the typical women's voice range, yours more than mine is a little bit low. In male ears, that is the first set of hairs in the ears to be lost when men start to lose their hearing. So it might actually be that they literally can't hear you. So that's where eye contact is super important, so that they know they have to work a little harder to listen to you. And when they complain that I just can't hear Susie's voice, like, well, then you might want to get hearing aids. This is not Susie's problem.
Wow, I never knew that. Oh my gosh, such good information. And that really is helpful because, it's interesting at coaching women through their careers and through the challenges, because we face different things, right? There's lots of different challenges that we face, but we know God is greater. We know that He is in control. We know that He created us in His
Yes.
image and we are made perfectly. And so sometimes whenever we're thinking about changing, it can feel like, oh, should I really do that? Should I really do that? And I think sometimes we're resistant to changing things that maybe we're not really sure how to change it, or we're not really sure if we would be successful in changing it. And,
Right?
it takes some effort, right? So whenever it takes effort and time, we sometimes have resistance against that. And so we just say, well, this is who I
Yeah.
am. And,
Yeah.
but whenever it comes to like the written word, how many years of schooling did we have to become better writers? We never just said, well, this
Right.
is how I write, but yeah, we'll say, well, this is just
Mm-hmm.
how I talk. And I know working on voice for me has been something that I've really tried to dive into because I understand the impact that it can make on others. And it's almost a
Yeah.
responsibility if we want to have our voices heard in a different way. It's not changing our voice, it's not changing who we are, but it's using the full expression of our range. It's actually learning how
Yep.
to use the instrument that God gave us fully instead of just saying, well,
Absolutely.
this is who I am. And so if you're thinking like, well, should I really change who I am? It's not changing who you are. It's actually using the full expression of who you are through your voice. And I love how you just gave some simple things. So what if someone's listening today and they're like, okay, I want to be able to sound more confident or more competent or more charismatic? What are some things
Yeah.
that perhaps they could do?
You can find a voice coach. There are voice and speech trainers all over the world, and also singing teachers oftentimes can do this too. But voice and speech trainers are specifically trained to help people work their voices. But like I said, you can give somebody all the tools in the world, but when it is that big moment, the personal narratives, the stories that they tell themselves are what's going to decide if it's successful or not. We can only overcome our challenges and live fully into this God-given life if our personal narratives support our courage and our determination. Now, if you're walking into that situation thinking, I don't know if this is right, I don't know if I should be doing this, then you're going to need to keep looking at that until you know, because your courage and your determination will show up in your voice. Just listen to the women in your life when they're speaking in a confident situation. This could be your mother confidently telling how something happened in her life the day before. And then if you hear that same person speak in a way that is maybe a little unsure, not quite clear on where they're going, you get to hear that when their intention, when their message is clear and confident, their voice follows. When their message is a little bit insecure, if there's a seed of doubt, the voice follows that. So the number one thing that you can do is get it straight that you have this God-given purpose in life, and this is the step that you need to take to move forward in that, and that'll show up in your voice.
Beautiful. So, Nancy, we talked about our personal narratives and how these stories that we have, how these can really affect us, whether it's speaking or even in our careers. But how can they affect us in other areas of our life, or do they?
Absolutely. When I talk about voice, when I talk about personal narratives impacting your voice, I'm talking about your literal voice, but I'm also talking about your figurative voice. And that's the voice inside your head, the voice that you listen to inside your own head. And what message, what story is that feeding you? And a lot of times, those personal narratives might make your own personal voice insecure. If your voice at any point in your life wasn't respected, wasn't heard, you were put down. I even had one woman tell me that she was told as a small child, you have ears, but you don't have a voice. Now listen. And that woman took that moment and carried it forward into her adult life. And it stopped her from making decisions that would have made her more impactful in this world because she thought she didn't have a voice, even though that doesn't make sense. She talked every day to her friends, but there was something taking the power out of her voice. And it was that moment. And so this confidence in your own voice is in your figurative voice as well. And it impacts how you relate to everyone in your life and the decisions that you make around your careers. It impacts the decisions you make about what you're going to wear that day. It makes an impact on your hairstyle and how you treat other people in your lives. That internal voice, those personal narratives are huge. Yeah.
Hmm. It is. And I know the listeners have all been through different things. I know when I was a young girl, I was really shy and quiet. And I had experienced a trauma when I was a young girl. And I think that's what kind of like silenced me. I was trying to like hide this secret, I guess. But it just felt like for
Yeah.
years I wasn't using my voice, or I was just trying to keep my secrets in, or whatever it was. But it felt really challenging because it almost felt like if people weren't encouraging me to speak, do they even want to hear what I have to say, or do what I have to say, is it
Yeah.
really important? Will it even be valued? And so
Mm-hmm.
I know the work that I've done to kind of overcome the different things in my life, but whether they've had a big T trauma, as you were saying, or a little T trauma, how can we really change these personal narratives so they can quit affecting us? How can we change the internal and the external so we can really live our best lives? The ones that God, quite
Absolutely. And it's
frankly, has designed us to live.
Yes, yes. I heard something fantastic the other day. I heard that life is a series of problems, and if you don't have problems anymore, then you're dead. And so embrace the problems. And the way that that applies here is that, finding your voice and finding these narratives, it's a problem. It's not going to be an easy task. And so you need to, through journal or through prayer or through a personal private retreat, you need to be willing to face these things and question them and wonder if this story was caused by a flawed person who intentionally or unintentionally was doing me harm. Should I keep that story, or should I reject that story, Or should I reframe it to look at it as a positive? For instance, there's a person that I've been working with who had 3 different fathers when that person was growing up. And that person told me that each father had a different message for walking through the world and how much respect a person should have for other people. So this client of mine took those 3 different perspectives from the male role models in their childhood and decided, which ones of these work for me? Which ones of them can I spin and make them work for me? And which ones do I actually need to get rid of because it was garbage, it was evil, and it was wrong? And so that's an opportunity to look at each of those different scenarios. Either keep it because it's awesome and it's empowering me, spin it and realize that, oh, this person suffered, and so that's how their suffering came to me, and I can take that now and make sure that that suffering doesn't happen to anyone else. Or realize that it was evil working through that person and there is no place for that in my life. Doing that work, Mary, is hard, but it's so worth it. And that's why I recommend having a mentor or a coach. It's familiar territory for most mentors and coaches to help you work with the things that motivate you, that are in your background. And I think it's a wise thing to have somebody help walk through this with you. And then the third thing is just trust. Trust your heart, trust the spirit, trust what you hear in prayer. If it feels right and it makes you smile and bubble with joy, fills you with energy and electricity, and maybe even give you goosebumps, heck yes, that's what you need to find the determination and the courage to follow.
So beautiful. So beautiful. I love how you said that because it really can help us take a different stance towards this and change our personal narratives, which is what we need to do if we're going to do something different in life. And, what was coming up there is our personal narratives aren't just from the things that are said to us. It's probably also coming from the things that we've seen or witnessed. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be, it could be an experience maybe we even saw somebody else go through, whether it be a mother or a grandmother or somebody else in our lives, or maybe a way that they acted in their careers or their lack of having a career that kind of even produces guilt in us or different reactions. So just really thinking about all areas of our lives, all experiences that could really be feeding into this.
And Mary, there's one thing we haven't touched on much, and that is the traditions through time. We are living in an unprecedented time for empowered women. So if we look to our mothers and our grandmothers for inspiration, we might instead find stories in our heritage that holds us down, but no longer belongs in this modern world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we can only do what's right for us. And that's why we should always just talk to God and try to figure out what is right. What does he want? Because I know even when I was struggling in my career, I even questioned, like, should I just be a stay-at-home mom? Should I be working? And I kind of felt guilty for that. And then I was like, oh no, God created me to work. Like, he created me for this. He also created me to be an excellent mother. And I should keep my priorities in line, but it doesn't mean I can only do one thing. And it's likely that, his mother, Mary, worked as well because of where they lived. They probably didn't have a lot of money. So she likely worked too. And work just looks a little different today. And so I think that we can take great pride in the work that we do and use all of our God-given abilities. So Nancy, this has been so wonderful. Before we wrap up today, I definitely want you to share, I know you have an upcoming event that people can come to if they're listening to this when it's released. Can you tell us more about your upcoming event?
Yeah, I'm going to be taking a deep dive on the personal narratives in a webinar coming up on the first one. I'm going to give 3 webinars in a row so that people can hopefully make it to one of these times. And it's going to be about the power of personal narratives to empower our voices. The first one is on Tuesday, December 20th, and that will be at 10 in the morning Central Time, 11 o'clock Eastern. The next one will be on Tuesday, January 3rd, same time, 10 o'clock Central. And the third one will be on Saturday, January 7th, 10 o'clock Central, to really, let's do some workshopping on this. Let's try this out in a live Zoom setting. And I hope you all can join me for this webinar. The way that you find the webinar is to go by my website, which is Nancy Boss, and that's NancyBoss.me, nancyboss.me. And there's a courses tab, and that's where you'll find the webinar listed, and you can sign up there, and it is free.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful gift for all the listeners. I know I want to jump on that. It's going to be incredible. So much that we can continue to learn about our personal narratives and how we can continue to use our voice to fulfill God's purpose for us here on earth. So love it, love it,
That's
love it.
right.
And we will put everything in the show notes, all the ways that you can connect with Nancy. She also has her TED Talk, so make sure you listen to that as well. And Nancy, as we wrap up today, tell me, who would you say is the most influential woman mentor in your life?
That's easy. It's actually three spiritual mentors, religious mentors who were women in a time when women were not necessarily respected as church leaders. These women stand up for me as strength and dedication, despite the back talk that they were getting from culture. So inspiring to me.
Love it. And Nancy, there's likely a woman listening today. She's feeling a little uncertain on, her next step in her career. Maybe she's feeling like she's made for more, but not really sure what she should do. What would you say to her?
It's important to honor that we can be stuck. Sometimes we are in situations that, holy cow, it's going to take a battle to get out of this situation. Understanding your own power and your own personal narratives, that empowers you in ways that will make other people uncomfortable. And it can lead to changes in your professional life or your personal life that you may not wish on yourself. It takes a tremendous amount of courage, but it is worth it because God asks us to show up with that courage and to be not afraid, because on the other side is the place where we can live out His purpose for us.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you for joining us today. And listeners, thank you for joining us today. As always, you're such a wonderful audience. We're so grateful that you're here. We never take it for granted that you would come here each and every week to listen to another wonderful episode. It is Christmas time, so I hope that you are celebrating. I hope you are taking some time to dive into God's Word, that you are really taking some time to reflect on your career goals. This is one of the best times actually to be advancing in your career. So if you haven't already, definitely head on over to maryguirovich.com where you can listen to our free masterclass, Why Earning a Promotion Feels So Dang Hard and What You Can Do Instead. I want you to feel encouraged during this time as you set yourself up for new goals for the upcoming year. But as I like to say, you don't have to wait for the new year to start on your goals. You can start today, heading into the new year, already ready to go, ready to talk to your boss and take that next step in your career. Well, definitely take some time to enjoy the holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Mary Guirovich Show. But until then, remember, you are only one plan away from your next promotion, and God, He's not done with you.
Hey friend, thank you for listening today. Be sure to join us next week for another great episode. If you receive value from today's show, I'd appreciate it if you would leave us a 5-star review to help others learn about the show. And if you're ready to fast track your career and increase your income, impact, and joy, then head on over to maryguirovich.com and check out the masterclass that teaches you how you can advance too. I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. This and so much more can be found in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you soon.